An all-out cartel war just exploded south of the border in Mexico, and now officials are warning the violence could spill over into the United States.
Dozens of people are dead, and a major Mexican city has been paralyzed by an explosion of violence in the state of Sinaloa,
where the Mexican army has killed at least 19 suspected members of the deadly Sinaloa cartel.
A mile from the Texas-Mexico border, cartel gun battles resulted in 6 people being killed, and a vehicle with Texas license plates burned and shot to pieces. This is all according to state police. But don't worry, you don't have to mourn the loss that badly, because what we're witnessing is 2 rival factions of the Sinaloa cartel at each other's throats, battling each other in the streets, competing for control of the world's most powerful criminal organization, worth billions of dollars. What a shame both sides can't lose. If only it were that simple though, because meanwhile the Mexican military has responded by deploying over 1,000 soldiers to the city, where they're now engaged in brutal urban combat. But according to the New York Times, there are bodies being dumped on the side of the road, gun battles in upscale neighborhoods, tractor trailers set on fire on the highway, and people being grabbed from their cars by cartel gunmen in broad daylight. I can't even imagine how terrifying it would be to live in a city where you're terrified to just go outside during the day. We'll see how the outcome of this battle will have a massive impact on both the security of Mexico and the drug epidemic inside the United States. Today, I want to examine why is this happening now, what is the Mexican and US authorities doing in response, and what does all this mean for the future of the cartels? But first, I want to tell you about the folks that made this video possible. Navy Federal Credit Union. Serving more than 2 million veterans around the world, Navy Federal understands the community and provides the support and service that they need. For more than 90 years, their mission has been to help active duty in all branches of service, veterans and family members reach their financial goals. Along with the top-notch financial services and support, Navy Federal also actively works to give back to the community by providing resources like Best Cities and Best Careers after service to help vets transition back to civilian life. And they're also proud to support the mission continues to connect veterans and volunteers with under-resourced communities, providing an outlet for veterans to continue service after the military. Many Navy Federal employees are veterans, military family members, and reservists, so they understand firsthand the needs of the community. Are members of the mission at Navy Federal. So head over to NavyFederal.org/veterans to check out all the Navy Federal offers and how their mission can support you today. These events all kicked off on July 25th, 2024, when the co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel named El Mayo met up with Joaquin Guzman Lopez, who's the son of the cartel's kingpin, El Chapo, who's been in prison in America since 2019. So they planned to take a private plane to go look at some real estate together with the governor of Sinaloa, which added fuel to the fire about claims that the cartel is in bed with local politicians, just casually going to hang out with the governor. So El Mayo claims that he was lured there under false pretense and was instead ambushed, blindfolded, forced into the back of a pickup truck. He was then driven to a secret landing strip where the plane flew him and Lopez to Texas and El Paso instead. Once there, US authorities made the arrest. El Mayo claims that this was all so Lopez could cut a deal with the United States and get a sweetheart deal, a lighter sentence. He released a 2-page letter through his lawyer with this whole version of events, claiming that he was double-crossed by Lopez. He's basically saying that El Chapos Son tried to do the cartel version of a coup. Now, why does any of that matter? In the cartel world, loyalty is everything. So betrayal of this magnitude, especially at such a high level, it's almost unheard of. If true, this raises questions about how deeply the DEA and FBI have infiltrated into the cartel and how much the US government may or may not have kept from Mexican authorities about this operation. One thing is for sure though, El Mayo made his accusations public so it would send a message back home to anyone loyal to him in the cartel. There was a tense period that lasted for about a month after El Mayo was arrested. All of the people in Sinaloa were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. How was it all going to shake out? Would the cartel's 2 factions, one loyal to Lopez and one loyal to El Mayo, find a way to resolve this peacefully? By early September, we knew that would not be the case. It would be war. One of revenge and vying for control to fill this power vacuum left in the Sinaloa cartel. According to Reuters, new brutal methods are now being used, tactics that would only ever occur to Gen Z cartel members. What they do is they stop you in the street or in your car at one of their roadblocks that they've set up, and then they demand to see your phone. If they find that you've been in contact with a rival faction, if you're chatting with the wrong person, then they put a bullet in your head and they kidnap everyone in the vehicle. Then they go after the people on your cell phone contact list to track them down. Today, gang wars have gotten a lot more complicated than just needing to wear the correct colors. You need to make sure you're not following the wrong people on Instagram too. Since September 9th, more than 260 people have been killed in the city and 200 kidnapped, which explains why the Mexican military has responded in the way that they did, and we'll get into that in a minute. But all this came as a shock, because over the past few years, they've been relatively peaceful there and lower homicide rates than ever before. This peace wasn't provided by the police and the government though. The reason for this stability was because there was a dominance by one single criminal organization which stopped all the smaller turf wars. It's what I like to call good old-fashioned put your head in the sand approach. But anyone who's been bullied in high school knows hiding only makes things worse in the end. With the government looking the other way, they didn't have a problem with the Sinaloa cartel as long as their existence didn't make news headlines. But they only grew more powerful during this time. According to historian Benjamin Smith, the reason this has destabilized the situation so much is because El Mayo's job at this point was to mediate between the Sinaloa cartel and the Mexican government. He was kind of like their liaison, keeping the peace until now. So the recent surge in violence is like a volcano that hasn't erupted in years. It's paralyzed the people living there, with parents refusing to even send their kids to school. But there is one organization that might still stand in the way of the cartel, aside from their own factions. The Mexican military has been deployed to stop the war. They've been tasked with urban combat in a city with a population of 1 million people, a difficult job for any unit. Squads of soldiers are seen pictured in luxury apartment buildings and homes in the city center. Some of them bombed out, burnt up cartel living rooms. Gun battles between Mexican soldiers and the cartel have sent locals diving for cover in supermarkets and cafes. In response, cartel members set fire to vehicles and left them in the middle of the road in an effort to block military reinforcements from reaching the city. Still, over 125 Mexican armored vehicles have arrived. But the first thing that the Mexican military did might actually surprise you and sound kind of counterintuitive. They went in and they disarmed all of the local police, took away all their weapons. Why? They do this every time there's concerns that the local cops are corrupt and working with the cartel.
Mexican Marines and federal troops went in, surrounded Acapulco police headquarters. They charged into the building. They essentially arrested 700 cops. They took their guns, their bullets, their bulletproof vests, and their radios.
The Complexity Science Hub, which is a research institute in Vienna, estimates that as many as 175,000 people are on the cartel's payroll, making them the 5th largest employer in Mexico. The second thing that they did was go weapons-free, hunting cartel members. On September 21st, security forces were involved in 3 separate shootouts with cartel factions. Gunmen tried to flee into nearby apartment buildings, but the Mexican army laid siege to the entire complex. They stormed the building and they eliminated 3 of the attackers and they arrested the 4th. On October 21st, though, there was the most intense firefight of the battle so far. Mexican troops came under fire from a platoon-sized 30-man team. They returned fire, eliminating 19 of the cartel members. When they checked their bodies, they found evidence that they were from the El Mayo faction. To this, I would like to extend the biggest unironic hua to the soldiers of the Mexican army who were on the front lines of this fight. Whatever criticism that we might have about how the U.S. and Mexican government have handled the war on drugs, whatever corruption issues that we've seen, a lot of these lower enlisted soldiers have displayed incredible bravery. To that point, 2 Mexican army soldiers were injured in the shootout, and many civilians have been caught in the crossfire. But despite soldiers' best efforts in their attempts to restore order in the city, residents still refuse to open up businesses, and I can understand why. I'm going to quickly list off some of the horrors that we've been seeing here over the past 2 months. An elementary school found a severed head on school grounds early in the morning. In another account, there were unmarked van that was abandoned on the street, packed full of 6 bodies in trash bags, just left there for days, until the cops finally found it. In the heat of Mexico, this is not a pretty picture. A Catholic priest who was a peace activist was murdered, gunned down on the street in broad daylight. Media buildings have been shot up to intimidate and send a message not to report on them. About 96% of all crimes in Sinaloa are never solved. The cartel basically operates with impunity. The Financial Times spoke with a 35-year-old resident of the city who said, quote, "It's like a narco pandemic. The city's being held hostage." They wouldn't give their name for fear of reprisals against them and their family, which just goes to show the state of what's happening over there. Yes, it's true that this state has been the home base of Sinaloa Cartel since its founding for like 5 decades, so residents here say that they're kind of accustomed to this sort of thing. But what makes all of this unlike anything that we've seen before is that it's gone on for nearly 2 months now, when normally these periods of violence usually sparks up for only a couple of days. Meanwhile, the governor here, Ruben Moya, said, quote, "The government is not overpowered at all. On the contrary, we're increasingly better positioned to confront the violence. And there is no shortage of violence. In the latest civil war between the El Mayo faction and the Little Chapitos, as they're called, Lopez's faction, the new tactics that they're using remind me of some of the rumors that I heard when I was growing up about some of the cartel's horrific tactics, like the Colombian necktie, for instance. And if you don't know what that is, I strongly encourage you to not Google it if you're eating right now. So this new generation is taking knives and sticking them through sombreros and pizza boxes to their murdered victims. Don't worry, it gets worse than that. An indictment from the U.S. Justice Department in 2023 claimed that the Chapitos also used corkscrews, electrocution, hot chilies, not even sure what they did with those, and they also fed their victims to tigers while they were alive. All of this is what YouTube would prefer me to call enhanced interrogation techniques. It's the current trend of morbid message sending between sicarios. On a strategic level, looking at these moves, the fact that the bodies are often dragged out into the open make me think that these are territorial markers or tokens of allegiance. Basically, they're playing, "This is our turf," or insulting the rival faction. Public displays of intimidation like this and brutality are hallmarks of cartel hitmen. It's also what terrorists do. When I was in Iraq, insurgents would publicly execute collaborators and put up flyers threatening anyone who worked with the Americans. It's an attempt to show their strength by flaunting how they can target anyone, anywhere, even when hundreds of soldiers have been deployed to the city. They're called narco messages, and Lauren Etchiana is a sociologist and consultant on cartel issues, and she says, quote, "Drug traffickers in Mexico brag about their killings with show-off practices. Barbarism is a sign of power. Blood is a sign of power," end quote. It's true, we've seen the Mexican military step up their operations in the San Diego-Tijuana border. They're targeting smuggling points and monitoring U.S. border routes in this hilly topography here. They've created new command centers with outposts to prevent these cartel operations, and they're taking the heat doing it. We've seen cartel drones attacking these new outposts. In fact, just in August, the Mexican military first acknowledged rumors that some of their soldiers had been KIA by drone-dropped bombs. But there are competing ideas of how to stop the violence. Some, like General Francisco Ileana Orde, said that the state's security, quote, "doesn't depend on us, it depends on the rival groups stopping their confrontations." So basically he's suggesting that the only way for the violence to stop is for the gangs to stop it. That's not what people want to hear right now from the guy who's supposed to be in charge of security here, which is probably why he was removed from duty about a month later. So Mexico's former president, Obrador, pointed the blame of the cartel war at the U.S. government for this new rise up of violence. He claimed that the U.S. struck this secret deal behind the Mexican government's back to make this arrest happen. He claimed that the violence in Mexico was the fault of this arrest that was orchestrated by U.S. law enforcement. Okay, if we take that on face value, if that really did happen, it could have undercut Mexico's sovereignty by not including them. In international relations, that is considered a party foul. However, the U.S. government claims that they had no advanced knowledge of the operation. It's plausible that the American government did actually know, but didn't want to compromise the operation by sharing the details with Mexico, who could be corrupt and have it leak. Personally, I think it's crazy that people are legitimately upset that one of the world's most dangerous drug lords was arrested. There are people who are doing mental gymnastics to try to justify why it's bad that a cartel leadership is getting dismantled, but that's just me. What we do know is that the U.S. Justice Department has undoubtedly been focusing their efforts on the Sinaloa cartel More recently, especially after an indictment last year that reported that the Sinaloa cartel is responsible for most of the illegal fentanyl that has been shipped into the United States and killed more than 70,000 Americans annually. So, since 2021, they've managed to infiltrate the Sinaloa cartel and obtain unprecedented access to the organization's highest levels around the world, implying that they have informants throughout the cartel. What's fascinating about this new generation of the cartel war, though, is how differently it's being fought from the past. We're witnessing a period of fast, radical change inside Mexico right now, as they try different approaches to keep the violence in check. Take a look at how in September 2024, the Mexican government approved putting their 120,000 National Guard personnel under the command of the military in an attempt to fight the Sinaloa cartel. And this is part of a wider trend. A 2021 study by CIDE, a Mexican research organization and university, found that between 2006 and 2021, over 246 government functions that were previously overseen by civilian authorities were transferred to control of the Mexican military. This is a major change because the National Guard in Mexico is very different than how it is in the United States and other countries. It was originally created in 2019 specifically to be a civilian security force under the control of the Public Safety Ministry. Its purpose was to get Mexican army personnel off the streets by 2024, but now things are going in the opposite direction. Critics of the move say it'll lead to forced disappearances with impunity. One of those critics is former U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Arturo Scoricon, who said, quote, "For the first time since the Mexican Revolution, the armed forces are playing a role in public policies that have nothing to do with national defense. It makes it harder for whoever comes after him to change course." Critics of the strong arm approach claim that these steps legitimize state violence and come with the horrors that history has shown are inherent in a militarized police state. What is the Mexican National Guard up against? Supporters of it say that there really isn't any other way to crack down against the cartels. So what is the Mexican National Guard up against? What happened is the Sinaloa cartel fractured into two major groups. You've got the El Mayos on the one hand, the El Chapatitos on the other. So they're now up against two cartels instead of one. So gunmen have pledged their allegiance to either El Mayo or Lopez, the son of El Chapo, who's in prison right now. The cartel actually operates as this decentralized horizontal system of departments, the point being that they have no clear leader. Each wing of the cartel operations has their own leader that cooperate with other departments instead of taking top-down orders like in a traditional hierarchy. From their point of view, this is a smart strategy because you can't cut the head off the snake to kill the whole organization, which is what law enforcement would love to be able to do. The downside from the cartel's perspective is that this decentralized strategy also means that a breakup of the cartel means both sides have a lot of power. And that's how the cartel manages to be a threat to the military, by adapting tactics normally seen on the battlefield to strike at Mexican military and police forces. Just look at how earlier this year in June, a raid discovered 4 US-made rocket launchers in the Sinaloa cartel's weapon cache, along with belt-fed machine guns, grenade launchers, and hand grenades and other military-grade gear. Mexican authorities have said that they want to see the United States government stop and crack down on guns being smuggled into Mexico. Meanwhile, the U.S. has requested Mexico stop the flow of migrants and illegal substances. They've had to step it up by deploying anti-mine equipment and troops to counter an increasing number of IEDs and roadside bombs. Mexican authorities are concerned that the cartels have access to even worse tactics and that the violence could spread from the capital city to the rest of the Sinaloa state and onward to neighboring regions. Looking further north, a civil war within the most powerful cartel could slow down the flow of illegal narcotics into the U.S. briefly and might even weaken the cartel if that split lasts long enough, but that's a double-edged sword. Whatever conflict splits apart the cartel in their hometown of Culiacan could spread throughout the cartel, breaking out into even more open violence in the United States as well. And if the rival cartels sense that the feared Sinaloa cartel is weakened, they could smell blood in the water and try to take Sinaloa's assets or territory by force, upsetting the delicate balance of power throughout the United States and Latin America. The new wave of violence taking place in Mexico is happening under new President Claudia Sheinbaum. Right as she takes office, she took office on October 1st. And the eyes of the United States and the entire region look to see how she's going to handle it. Each president in Mexico over the past few decades has tried different approaches to handling the cartel, ranging from crackdowns to olive branch approach, and each approach has had mixed results. Sheinbaum looks like she has pledged to continue the same tactics as her predecessor of hugs, not bullets, of trying to not provoke the cartels. She argued in a recent statement that a military solution alone wouldn't solve the crisis, saying, quote, "Going in with firepower would cause a war, as occurred in the past, and which didn't get us anywhere. When we come into government, a series of new laws reforms will be presented that will allow us to have a national system of intelligence and investigation," end quote. So she cites evidence that this is going to work because, by her estimation, murders went down slightly since 2018 in certain areas, and even though forced disappearances have increased and cartel control of territory has become more than ever before. Yet, in a paradoxical twist, Sheinbaum has acknowledged this strategy of hugs not bullets has its limits, and she's a strong supporter of the Mexican National Guard acting like police and first responders. But we still don't know what her short-term strategy will look like on the ground in the state of Sinaloa. So what do you think of this new cartel war? What do you think is the right way to respond to it for U.S. and Mexican authorities? Should they go and crack down harder like in El Salvador? Or do you think that they should go with a more peaceful approach and try to invest in welfare programs to lift people out of poverty so that they don't ever turn to the cartel? I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Thank you for watching Spare Parts Army, and check out one of these other videos on the cartel if you're interested.